This is not just a prison break story. Two men escaped Auschwitz for a reason that was even bigger than survival. They were not trying to disappear. They were trying to make sure the world could no longer pretend it did not know. In April 1944, Rudolf Vrba and Alfred Wetzler broke out of Auschwitz, reached Slovakia, and helped produce one of the first detailed eyewitness reports of how Auschwitz actually worked. At almost the same moment, Nazi Germany was preparing the mass deportation of Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz. Think about how insane that sounds. Escaping Auschwitz was already close to impossible. The camp was built to crush hope before it crushed the body. Guards, dogs, electric fences, watchtowers, public executions, terror everywhere. But Vrba had learned something early. The real danger was not trying to escape. The real danger was failing. And after nearly 2 years inside the camp, he and Wetzler understood something else too. Auschwitz was not just a place of murder. It was a machine built on deception. People arrived believing they were being resettled. Instead, most were killed almost immediately. Vrba had seen enough to understand the pattern. He'd worked around the arrival area where transports came in. He watched families step out of cattle cars carrying bags, coats, even toys, because they still believed they had a future. The lies continued all the way to the gas chambers. The victims were told they were going to bathe, to be disinfected, to stay calm, to remember where they left their clothes. That was the genius and the horror of the system. The Nazis did not just kill people. They kept them confused long enough to keep the killing process efficient. Vrba later understood that if the truth got out in time, some of that machinery could break. Then came the deadline. Germany occupied Hungary on March 19, 1944. That changed everything. A huge Jewish population was now directly exposed. Vrba and Wetzler believed a new wave of deportations was coming, and they were right. From May 15 to July 9, 1944, around 440,000 Hungarian Jews were deported, most of them to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where the majority were killed after arrival. So by early April, the two men were not just planning an escape. They were racing a clock. Their escape plan was both simple and unbelievable. With help from the camp underground, they prepared a hiding place inside a pile of wood stacked between the inner and outer perimeter fences. They knew the SS search pattern. If prisoners went missing, guards would lock down the area and search hard for roughly 72 hours. If the men could stay hidden for that full period, the assumption would be that they had already escaped the immediate zone, and the search would shift outward. To make the hiding place safer, they used tobacco soaked in gasoline around the woodpile, based on advice that it could confuse the dogs. It sounds like something from a movie, but that was the plan. Hide in plain sight inside Auschwitz itself, until the search lost intensity. So on April 7, 1944, they climbed into that hollow space under the woodpile and waited, not for a few hours, for days, in darkness, barely moving, barely breathing. Every sound above them could mean death. At one point, guards came dangerously close. According to later accounts, the men above the pile were so near that Vrba and Wetzler prepared knives, thinking they might have to fight in a space barely big enough to move. Then, by sheer luck, the guards rushed away after hearing noise elsewhere. Even after surviving that, there was one more cruel twist. When the time came to crawl out, the weight of the wood made it hard to lift the boards. For a moment, it looked like they had escaped the camp only to bury themselves alive. But they forced one plank aside, then another, and finally got out. Now came the second escape. Getting out of the camp perimeter was only the beginning. They still had to cross occupied territory and reach Slovakia alive. They moved mostly at night, drank from streams, and depended on scattered acts of help from local Poles, who themselves risked death for helping Jews. After about 2 weeks, they reached Žilina in Slovakia. There, they met Jewish officials and gave a detailed account of Auschwitz. An in-depth report was drawn up in Slovak and German, covering what had happened in the camp from 1942 to 1944. It described the camp layout, the killing process, and the scale of the murder. Later, this became known as the Vrba-Wetzler report, part of what is often called the Auschwitz report or Auschwitz protocols. And this is where the story gets even more important. The escape was not the victory. The report was. The point was to destroy secrecy. The Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum says the report was sent through different channels to Allied governments, the World Jewish Congress, the International Red Cross, and the Vatican. The US Holocaust Memorial Museum says it went public worldwide through media channels in Switzerland in June 1944, after being copied, translated, and distributed. In other words, two men who had almost died under a pile of wood had forced one of the most secret murder operations in history into the open. But here is the part that hurts. The truth did not stop the killing overnight. While the report was moving through diplomats, church networks, newspapers, and officials, the deportation of Hungarian Jews was already happening. Train after train kept coming. The world was still too slow, too cautious, too political, too willing to delay action, even when the evidence was finally in front of them. So this is not a neat hero story where the warning arrives just in time and everyone is saved. It is messier than that, darker than that, more human than that. And that is exactly why it matters. Vrba and Wetzler did not escape because they thought the world was good. They escaped because they believed proof still mattered. They believed that if people could no longer hide behind doubt, some lives might still be saved, and history would at least record what happened honestly. That is a brutal mission for two starving prisoners to carry on their backs. But they carried it anyway. Their story is not only about courage, it is about clarity. Inside a system designed to erase people and then erase the evidence, they made sure the evidence survived. So the real question is not whether their escape was brave. Of course it was. The real question is this: when the truth finally appears, why do powerful people still move so slowly?